2 episodes ago I promised you a Sonic video that was promptly discarded when I was distracted by my ongoing battle against sexual desire. This video has nothing to do with Sonic either. It's alright though, I have an excuse. I just really love lying to people. Pokémon is a series that I have held near and dear since I was a sprog. I think its brilliant mechanics go rather uncelebrated sometimes, so I'm going to take a moment to gush about them. Building your own completely unique team adds tons of replayability. The battle mechanics are spot on. They're quite literally child's play to get to grips with, but they have a ton of depth for you to discover if you're so inclined. For me though, the most impressive part is the social aspect. The games effortlessly combine the satisfaction of a single-player RPG with the communal fun of a multiplayer game. I've got a friend who's managed to whittle away hundreds of hours competing with his girlfriend's son to try and catch them all, which I kinda think sums up the whole thing rather nicely. So, point is, I don't dislike Pokémon whatsoever. In fact, it's always been one of my favourite series. But despite this, I think that it gets away with a lot more than it deserves to. You see, Pokémon has stagnated. In other news, cows go moo and bears crap in the woods. Personally, I don't really mind a game sticking to its comfort zone, but it's really beyond the pale at this point. I think that the series has long since perfected its formula and is now in a bit of a rut. And with Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire out fairly soon, there's no better time to be a wet blanket and have a good old moan about Pokémon. Why don't you join me? It'll be cathartic. X and Y are far from bad games, and are far from the worst games in the series in my opinion. But nevertheless, I'm going to use them as my major example throughout this video for a couple of reasons. They're the most recent games in the series, and they're the first 3D games in the main series. Almost all of X and Y's qualities have to be credited to Pokémon Red and Green. As the first 3D games in the series, they should have been a revolution. Instead, they still use a simple grid, a tile set to place objects in the overworld. Since it's in 3D and not an action-oriented genre, you could have some dynamic camera angles and beautiful vistas to really capture the adventure of the world. Yeah, sure, there are dynamic camera angles every now and again, but go and play, say, Pokémon Colosseum. Actually, no, don't do that. Go and play any other 3D RPG. You will have full analog control, rather than only being able to run in 8 directions or having to put up with the awful skate controls. In addition, the areas will be designed in full 3D, rather than still using the same square routes we've been seeing since 1996. You know, the kind that look like they were designed on an Etch-a-Sketch. If you wanted to take advantage of this hypothetical lovely scenery, perhaps the Pokémon battles could take place in the overworld a la Chrono Trigger, rather than cutting to a vague subdimension. Okay, so perhaps technical limitations would bottleneck this. But on the subject of locales, I think that Pokemon's repetition has resulted in a lack of identity in the later games. I can name tons of locations from the first 4 generations and hum a lot of the tunes. Generations 3 and 4 were especially good at this. You had cities like Sutopolis, which was built inside a volcano. Fordtree was a city of tree houses. Orborough was a mining town. Eterna City was a juxtaposition of old and new, with measured, plodding music to show how slowly time moves there. Compare with Generations 5 and 6, where the towns are named after clouds and ingredients in perfume respectively. I feel that a lot of locations lack identity as a result of the unfamiliar terms. I mean, there are cool locations such as Chaleur and Laver, but being completely honest, I only really remembered about them because I did a precautionary Google search before I wrote this, which I think says more than an explanation ever could. This lack of identity is kind of compounded for me by the music. Now, I can't say the first thing about music theory. I did keyboard lessons for years and I don't know the first thing about it, ironically because I was too busy playing Pokémon. I guess all that I can really say is that I feel that the tunes are less memorable. I don't really get the melodies stuck in my head anymore. I think they've gained a greater ambience, I'm just not really sure how much that benefits the atmosphere. Compare, for instance, Santaloon Forest, which again I had to Google, with Eterna Forest. Both are great tunes, but I get a lot more from Eterna. Now, I fully appreciate that it might just be that I'm an adult man now, whose brain space has to be taken up with other things like mortgages and James Joyce. So if you find yourself raising your eyebrows at the whole locales and music complaint, feel free to raise them virtually at me in the comments below. For now, let's move on. The games still use an identical story to the one used in 1996. You can pretty much Mad Lib it together. Professor Noun hands you a Pokédex, you beat the first gym, encounter evil team Noun, and you get the idea with that. The problem with the continual use of the same story, well, you know, besides being boring, is that everything, such as the characters and the Pokemon and the locations, are all designed to fit a mould. As a result, the theming gets weaker, the overall design becomes more rigid, and the gameplay is actively hamstrung. Because of the gym system, most bosses have a very obvious type and are thus easy to sweep with one super effective Pokemon. You could have bosses for other reasons, like any other reason. I mean, do you remember what it was like before these elements became entrenched in the franchise? It allowed a fresh-faced game to surprise and excite the player. Your rival being the champion in Pokemon Red and Blue was an excellent twist because it added a very personal stake to the final boss. But because this has now been watered down to a formula, it's fairly obvious that Cynthia, for example, is the champion. Battling through the evil team before trying to catch the legendary Pokemon used to be exciting, and now it's routine. I don't think the story should be complex, as the more talking there is, the less battling there is, but I can set my watch by the story at this point, and that's never a good thing. Speaking of tradition, Pokemon still keeps around its clunky HM system. Now, I do apologise for this, but I'm going to have to delve into the dreaded regions of maths here for a moment. An optimal Pokemon team has 24 slots for moves. In Generation 1, 5 slots had to be reserved for HMs to ensure that you could traverse the overworld without any problems. To put it another way, over an entire team slot had to be dedicated to travelling, and it's only really gotten worse from there. This team slot serves no other purpose than allowing you to press A at a small tree, or a body of water, or a boulder. What's even worse is that these exist in addition to the artificial roadblocks like the Coffee Man in Viridian City, which just serve to keep the game linear and, as such, could replace HMs entirely. As an alternative, how about puzzles and roadblocks based on typing? A small tree could be burned down by a fire or an electric type Pokemon. Water could be crossed by a water or flying type, or frozen by an ice type for you to walk across. Grass Pokemon could influence trees to grow to create bridges. You know, you'd get the idea with that, just rethink the concept a little. This could promote re-exploring areas with new Pokemon and help make your Pokemon feel like they're actually a part of the world, rather than just being a menu to select cut from. There's plenty more to be done with Pokemon's online capabilities. And I don't mean like an MMO, like I say, I think that Pokemon's strength is in combining single player depth with multiplayer elements. But how about lobbies? You could find parks in the overworld that hold various lobbies for you to battle, trade and swap items with real people. The more seamless the integration, the better this would be. As well as this, it could help keep the trading personal. You see, online trading fundamentally changed the way that trading felt. Before Pokemon went online, getting a hold of a version exclusive Pokemon meant cooperating with your friends. It meant something when you worked out a trade that would benefit you both. Now, it's about hoping that your internet connection is stable enough to connect to the GTS for a few minutes. It's not really difficult to catch a Skrelp, go online and trade it for a Clauncher. It takes a few minutes and removes a lot of the romance from the encounter. It's basically a buffer between you and the Pokemon you want. From that perspective, I really have to wonder if the two-version system is now obsolete. I mean, I would love to see Pokemon follow in Oracle Games' footsteps and release two completely unique games that complement one another, rather than a carbon copy with a few minor changes. But that would be splitting Game Freak's attention, and thus would come with the risk of one or both of the products being subpar. As an alternative, how about a single cartridge with randomly generated Pokemon? With over 700 Pokemon, I'm sure there's enough room to create a substantial Pokédex for each playthrough. Additionally, it would encourage interaction with all players to maximise the chances of you getting the Pokemon you want. This effect could be amplified with a set of wild starter Pokemon and legendaries which, generally speaking, seem to get people excited. Okay, so the cynic in me says that this would prevent Game Freak from basically making 3 games for the price of 1. And there are tons of potential problems with it. I am kind of just spitballing to try and exemplify what I mean, to try and kind of prove that alternatives do exist. For now though, let's keep rolling on to my next topic, Pokemon's amnesia. Not the move. What I mean is, there are a ton of fun features and general advancements in Pokemon that go all but forgotten by the next game. The Underground, for example, was a fun minigame that also rewarded you with items to use in the main quest. Things like the VS Seeker and the Poké Radar went forgotten by Generation 5. Or, to use a more relevant example, everybody loved the secret bases, so why is it taking them until a remake to come back? The remakes don't even make use of the extra variety afforded by the larger Pokédex, which is strange. The more Pokemon, and thus the more choice you have, the better. They're programmed into the game anyway, there's literally no reason not to do this. I suppose the major point that I'm driving at here is that the most significant changes that X and Y made to the formula were quite insubstantial. The EXP share made the game phenomenally easy, removing all thought from balancing your team. The Super Training and Friend Safari made creating a competitive team easier than ever, yet it would still take hours and hours to IV breed a perfect Pokemon, and most people I know who might be interested don't bother as a result. Pokemon Ami was cute, especially the title, which was great, but it wasn't exactly an engaging gameplay experience. That just leaves Mega Evolutions, which, full disclosure, is the main reason I wanted to make this video. I have a few niggles with them to start off with. Firstly, they can't help but subscribe to the Digimon school of design, that is to say adding things to existing monsters rather than creating organic designs to fit an idea. I like to think that Pokemon usually exhibits more nuance than that. Secondly, most of the Pokemon that got them are already strong enough. Apparently the top tier Pokemon players over at Smogon are thinking of banning Gengar from the ban list, it's that good. Now, these are just niggles. Pokemon, due to its sheer numbers, is pretty much impossible to balance anyway, and I happen to think that a lot of Digimon look pretty cool. This guy's a robot T-Rex, so he's pretty much living the dream. No, the major problem with Mega Evolutions is, like the EXP share, they are pretty much a gameplay non-element. There are no tactics or tricks, maneuvers or penalties, no thought involved in getting a Mega Evolution out there. You simply press one extra button and all of a sudden Charizard looks even cooler, and he's even stronger, and he's a dragon type now. Hashtag childhood saved. Mega Evolutions are a thinly veiled hype machine. Why do you think it is that only the most popular Pokemon got them in X and Y? The entire focus of ORAS's marketing campaign has been on these Mega Evolutions as well, rather than unveil a new gameplay feature that would revolutionise or advance the series. Each trailer is focused on a new design that we may or may not use. ORAS strikes me as rather cynical in general, even for Pokémon, a series that's been doing the Kerching motion so hard and so fast that it's bloody got tennis elbow. Okay, Heart Gold and Soul Silver didn't make any amazing advancements, but at least they fixed some substantial problems with the originals. The botched Kanto region, for example, or the wonky level curve. I don't see the same benefit to ORAS. Ruby and Sapphire still look, sound and play fine. My only problem with them was the abundance of sea routes, which meant that you spent half the map surfing, burning through repels or else being bombarded by the same small group of water Pokemon. I admire their dedication to the theming, but that's all I can really say for it. By the looks of the map in ORAS, this problem isn't being addressed. And by the looks of the Pokédex, they're not adding in many of the new Pokemon. So, besides Mega evolving more monsters, that only leaves the benefit of making some Hoenn Pokemon easier to catch, which doesn't necessitate a full retail release in this day and age of gigabytes and Facebooks. I mean, what other game series do you know that could get away with this? With remaking games at almost the same pace as they make new ones. In fact, it's not unreasonable to include the third core versions as remakes of sorts, and if you do, literally half of the mainstream Pokemon series output is remakes. Now, here I know Game Freak's a business, Hoenn was widely requested, and Nintendo in general have something of a reputation for not really shaking up their long-running franchises. In other news, radiators are warm, and when Katy Perry says big balloons, she actually means her breasts. But I've seen a lot of meek acceptance about Pokemon stagnation. And while I'd be loath to tell you how to think, it doesn't have to be like this. I think Pokémon could be more than just a formula, but it isn't ever going to be if the status quo is mistaken for the best case scenario. Do you remember that idea from earlier about the single, randomised version replacing the two-version system? Do you remember how I said that probably wouldn't work? It would be a huge risk, but that's exactly it. I think Pokémon could benefit from taking some risks. With risk comes new ideas and a new identity. And I'll be honest, I'd much rather see that than see the series continue to redesign regions in Pokémon ad nauseum. Thank you very much for watching, and I appreciate your patience in waiting for the Sonic video. I shouldn't have announced that so early. That was kind of irresponsible of me because it was inevitable that that was going to happen. This video hasn't actually cut into the Sonic video's time at all. Since I'm kind of back at uni, I was looking for ways to cut down on the process of making the Sonic video, and the one that I hit upon was to use more gameplay footage. Now, unfortunately, my term time setup isn't exactly ideal for recording gameplay footage, so I am waiting for a USB extension lead coming in through the door. Anyway, thanks for your patience. If you have anything to contribute, any ideas, which I'd be very interested to see, anything you agree or disagree with, please feel free to leave a comment below. If you enjoyed this video, you'd know how to say that you enjoyed this video, I'm sure. Catch you later. But that was almost a joke.